The African American Legend series highlights the accomplishments of blacks in areas as varied as politics, sports, aviation, business, literature, and education. We will explore how African Americans have succeeded in areas where they'd been previously excluded because of segregation, racism, and lack of opportunity. I'm your host, Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Jr., and with us today is Howard Dodson, the chief of the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. Welcome to African American Legends, Howard.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Brother Man.
Well, you have been the chief for 27 years, and now you're stepping down. What would you say was your major accomplishment during those many 27 years?
Well, I think probably the most important thing is that the Schomburg Center had been around for over 50 years when I came, and it had a reputation within the academic and scholarly community. And within the Harlem community itself, it was recognized as a significant presence. But the larger national and indeed international community did not have a very good understanding of what the Schomburg Center was and what its significance was for both understanding the past of black people, but most importantly, serving as a resource for thinking about our future. And so I would say that my most important accomplishment has been to both grow and develop the institution and develop a broader awareness of its place and role in documenting and preserving the heritage of people of African descent worldwide.
Well, you've done that in so many different ways with various seminars and presentations and film and collections. Of those activities, which do you think were most effective in getting the message of the Schomburg out to the public?
Well, when I arrived, you may recall, Roscoe, there was a lot of controversy at the Schomburg Center. My predecessor had hired a European or a Caucasian as the head of our manuscripts and archives division. And the community had decided that he was in charge of all of the collections of the library. And so for a period of about a year and a half before I arrived, about all people knew about the Schomburg Center was this controversy. What I chose to do very, very early on was to focus on both expanding our exhibition programs and our education programs, increasing the number of opportunities that the broad general public had to come to the Schomburg Center, to experience it firsthand, and to learn more about who we were and what we were doing. And so those education programs and those exhibitions were our kind of vehicle for marketing the center nationally and eventually internationally.
And because of it was a new building at that time, because of that building and the auditorium and the various spaces, people would come to visit and to go to these programs. And you had all kinds of programs. You had programs about education, about history, about health, about the Caribbean, about Africa. And that's really what the role of a Center for Research in Black Culture should be. Could you differentiate between a research center and just a library that collects material?
Well, the New York Public Library, of which the Schomburg Center is a part, has 89 branch libraries. Those are libraries where the general public goes and checks out books, CDs, and other kinds of media now. They go there, young people go there and have an opportunity to study, et cetera, and they do a lot of other things in the branch libraries now. And so they are principally service centers for students and for the general public who are seeking access to the published information and sound recordings and that kind of thing that are available to the public. Research libraries, on the other hand, have a very, very distinct role and function. And the first one is to, in some respects, document the human experience or whatever else their theme happens to be. And so in our case, our first responsibility is to continue on a year-round basis to document the history and heritage of people of African descent around the world. That means collecting books and manuscripts and photographs and artwork and film and videotape and all the rest of that. And making sure that it's kept in an environment so that not only those who come to use it today will have access to it, but that it'll be preserved into the 21st, the 22nd century. And so that kind of preservation, collection and preservation role is really at the heart of what research libraries are all about. And why the reason why they're so important, specifically for Black people, is that at the beginning of the 20th century, all people of African descent, except those living in Ethiopia, Liberia, and Haiti, were living under some form of European colonial domination. And the ideological justification for that was that Black people had no history and Black people had no culture. So white people who had history and supposedly had culture, it was their right, not only their right, but their duty to govern Black people and to impose their concepts of beauty, their concepts of culture and all the rest of that, impose that on their colonial and colonized people. During the latter part of the 19th century, Mr. Schomburg heard this myth that Black people had no history. And so he was a teenager at the time, but it just didn't make any sense to him. So he decided that he would collect evidence of the place and role of people of African descent in the making of human history and human civilization. And by 1925, he had put together a collection of more than 10,000 pieces of evidence. And that became the foundation of the Schomburg Center as we know it today.
Now, how did he get involved with the New York Public Library?
Well, Mr. Schomburg was a very, very interesting man. He actually lived in Manhattan and then lived in Harlem for a period of time, but he eventually moved to Brooklyn and had a house on Kosciuszko Street. And according to those who went to visit him, there were books and manuscripts everywhere in the house. Now, there are two stories about how he got to the New York Public Library. One of them was that Mr. Schomburg said that he wanted his collection to be available to the community. And so he went to the New York Urban League and asked if he could set up a library in the Urban League offices and operations. And the Urban League folk wisely said they're really not in the library business, but that they would work with him to negotiate some kind of relationship with the New York Public Library. And so they did. They were able to get a grant of, a token really, grant of $10,000. That's the equivalent of $1 for each item that was in the collection, which they gave to Mr. Schomburg in exchange for him depositing the collection at 135th Street. Now that's the official story.
But the real story.
The unofficial story is that Schomburg's wife, and this is interesting, Mr. Schomburg was married to an African-American, a Southern African-American woman. In fact, he was married to 3 Southern African-American women in sequence, not at one time. The interesting thing is that all 3 of them were named Elizabeth. I don't know what the purpose of that choice was, but at any rate, one of the Elizabeths got sick and tired of all that stuff in the house.
Get it out of here.
And she said, basically, you get out of here or I'm gone. And so he thought it wise to move his material someplace else. It's probably a combination of the two. But the good news is that he was able, with the assistance of the Urban League, to find a place to deposit the collection in Harlem as a part of the New York Public Library, and it's been a part of the New York Public Library ever since that time.
And for years, people who are doing research on movies and books and scholarly work have gone to the Schomburg.
For years they've done that, and they continue to do it in greater numbers as we go forward today. But the other piece that I am very proud of is that not just scholars, which is what research libraries generally serve. Research libraries generally serve a scholarly community. They serve the academic community. But ordinary people come to the Schomburg Center for a variety of things, for some of those programs that you were talking about. We've been having a women's jazz festival at the center since the early part of the 1990s. And it's done during Women's History Month. And it's on all of the Mondays of that month. And people who like jazz come to that series every year. It's been selling out every year as one of our kind of feature programs. But we do theater, we do dance, we do the various forms of artistic expression that allows people to appreciate the richness and diversity and beauty of the African and African diaspora experience. We bring to life on the stages of the Schomburg Center, Langston Hughes Auditorium, and we present in exhibitions that are accessible to people, whether you're a scholar or a young person coming in for the first time.
Now, your collection includes manuscripts, photographs, books, artifacts. How large is the collection, and how can the public find out what you actually have there?
Well, the original collection of Mrs. Schomburg was about 10,000 items. I'm pleased to report that the collection now numbers in excess of 10 million items. And it is books and manuscripts and artwork and all the rest of that. The good news is that upwards of 90% of the collections that we have been processed and cataloged, and they're online. So if you go to schomburgcenter.org and go to our catalog, you'll be able to search by subject, by author, by title, if you know the book title, and find out whether or not we have it. And if it turns out that we don't have it, and it's not likely, but if it turns out we don't have it, we know where to tell you to go to find it. And so just ask one of our librarians, and they'd be more than delighted to try to assist you in getting access to it.
Now, how large is your collection of photographs, for example?
The photographic collection numbers in excess of 750,000 images. And again, it goes back to the beginning of photography. Some of the earliest formats of photography, daguerreotypes and all the rest of that, actually did capture images of black folk. And so we've been able to collect some of those.
Brady had some from the Civil War.
Brady had some from the Civil War, and there are photographers that were actually working in Latin America and the Caribbean. We have collected some of those images as well. So if you can actually get a very good sense of the diversity of subjects that are documented. We have a site that we did several years ago. It's online, and it's a combination of a collection of over 30 works of literature by black women of the 19th century. And it's there, it's full text, it's fully searchable. You can find out what these women had to say about any subject from religion to family and all the rest of that. Just put that word in, it'll take you to every page of every book that's online and hear what they had to say. But we also created a database of images to go along with it. And so you want to see what black people looked like in the United States during the 19th century. That database of images, and it's probably about 800 or 900 images. You can go online and can see what they looked like when they were in church, what they looked like when they were working, what they looked like when they were out in the streets just doing ordinary kinds of things. You can see black people both in the 19th century and see how they've changed from the early part of the 19th century down to the end of the 19th century through that one database. Well, with the collections that we have at the Schomburg Center, you can do similar kinds of things for black people all over the world, going back actually to the beginning of photography again and coming right down to the present day. In addition to the online catalog, we've been doing a variety of exhibitions online, and one of the most robust and frankly one of the most significant projects developed online for educational and cultural and research purposes on the black experience is something we did a few years ago with the help and support of the Congressional Black Caucus called In Motion, the African American Migration Experience. And it's about 25,000 pages of material. It's about 8,000 images. There are about 16,000 pages of text. There are original maps documenting the movement of black people from one part of the country to the other. And there are teachers' guides there for teachers K through 12, as well as for some folk at the college level, to use this material in systematic ways to study the process by which black people who came here enslaved through a process of forced migration basically transform, and were largely concentrated in the U.S. South, how they transformed themselves into a national population with a presence in every state and every major city in the country, how that took place over a period of 300 plus years, and what the consequences of their presence in these diverse places in the United States has been, not only for their own development, but for the transformation of the nation as a whole. And it's a incredibly rich and powerful site, one that I think will likely force us to rethink how we study the Black experience itself. Most of our current scholarship on the Black experience can be talked about almost as an appendage of the official U.S. narrative. In other words, if you look at our history and our history books, we will spend a lot of time talking about Black people's role in the American Revolution,
Right.
in the Civil War, in World War I and World War II, et cetera, which is an important part of our history. But what this site does that's really quite extraordinary, it documents 13 different migrations. And of those 13, only 2 are forced. And it's the transatlantic slave trade and the domestic slave trade. All of the others are self-initiated. In other words, Black people sitting in the American South or in the Caribbean or on the African continent, for that matter, decide at some point in time that they can possibly live a better life than they're living if they move someplace else in the United States or abroad. And that act of, if you will, that self-activity of Black folk, is in fact evidence of the history that they're making. In other words, they're not participants in somebody else's history.
Right.
They're history makers in their own right. And the history makers are not just the W.B. Du Bois and the Frederick Douglasses, et cetera. They're the ordinary people, grandparents and great-grandparents, who made this decision to move someplace and try to create a better life for themselves. And that's what the site documents. And if we take that as the kind of central theme of our narrative, that our history is not what has been done to us or what we've done in somebody else's history, but rather what we've done for ourselves. If that's the centerpiece of our history, then we have to write a very, very different kind of take on that history and a different kind of appreciation, not just of what has been done to us, but what we've done to the nation and the world.
Now, how does the Schomburg Center work with the education community, public schools, private schools, colleges, to get this message across?
Well, we have an education program, and we have actually 3 or 4 different ways that we've worked over the years. One of them, we used to do actually summer institutes for teachers. And one of the things that we discovered, and it's just a fact, is that the gap between what the field of scholarship of African American, African diaspora and history and culture knows versus what is available to teachers in the textbook is this wide.
That's right.
And so our teachers have not had the benefit of access to this new knowledge that's been produced largely over the last 30, 40 years, that produces and provides us with a much more complex and diverse and nuanced understanding of our experience. So we would do these 6-week summer institutes with teachers, immersion program with faculty from the leading colleges and universities around the country and around the world. And I was just amazed, and have continued to be amazed, at how teachers, when challenged intellectually that way, you can see their minds come on and see them become, take a different kind of ownership of that, of our history and heritage than they have prior to that kind of study. So that's one kind of thing we've done. We do more short-term teachers workshops now, not because we wouldn't like to do the longer ones, but simply because the funding hasn't been there. We haven't been able to set that up. But we continue to do, on a regular basis, these intensive training sessions, usually 2 or 3 days rather than 6 weeks, for teachers. We also do special educational programs for young people, and probably the most significant one that we've had over the years is what I call our Junior Scholars Program.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's been operating now, I think we're in the 9th year. And each year for the last 9 years or so, we've brought somewhere between 100 and 150 young people, age basically 11 to 17, to the center every Saturday from October to May for their own special kind of immersion course in African American, African diaspora history. And that program, if you want to talk about things that I'm especially proud of, that's one that I'm especially proud of, because the young people come in and they are like
A sponge.
well, they've frequently been not forced, but more than encouraged
Right. Good way to sort of.
by their parents and
do that.
others to come on and spend their Saturdays doing that. But they get there and they're there for about 3 or 4 weeks, and you see the lights start going on in their heads. Mm-hmm. And the reason why we decided to do the program, the individuals who are selected to participate are nominated by teachers or parents or counselors or others as individuals who obviously have the ability but are not performing at the level of their ability. Mm-hmm. And so our agenda is to try to push them to seek to perform excellently in everything that they do, to kind of combat this this culture that's actually in the public schools, that somehow or another, if you're smart, if you're doing excellent work, that somehow or another either you're white or you're ostracized or otherwise, not valued. Well, what our program has come to do, as I've come to understand it, is create a community of excellence. Mm-hmm. And every Saturday when they come, that pursuit of excellence is reinforced, so that even when they go back into an environment that is not pursuing that, they have the kind of armor to withstand the pressure that other young people are bringing, saying that they don't have to or shouldn't be doing this. All of us should be trying to do the best that we can be and be the best that we can be every day of our lives. Otherwise, it's not worth living.
Well, that's the message that we try to deliver on African American Legends. That's exactly the message. Now, your successor is a young man by the name of Khalil Muhammed, and he's a very great scholar from Rutgers. Tell us a little about him, and what do you think his future is going to be at the Schomburg?
Well, Khalil is very, very Khalil, not Khalid.
Khalil, right.
There is another Khalid.
Yeah,
it's not him.
You're right. Good work.
It's Khalil Gibran Muhammed, and Khalil is just a very, very fascinating young man. When the library decided to put together a search committee for my replacement, they asked me what I thought the qualifications and characteristics of the person should be. And my first requirement was that they be someone young, mm-hmm. That they be someone in that 30 to 40 range who was able to bring the message and meaning of the center to that younger generation of both scholars but also of the public at large. Basically, I got the 50s and above. We've been doing incredibly good work with the generation that came through and shared time and space with me. But the long-term future of the center, quite frankly, is tied to what the next generation of people, young people, decide to do with it. Mm-hmm. We're not going to be here. Mm-hmm. And if there isn't a generation of young people who have embraced the center and are committed to it and are using it and working with it in the way that myself and our generation did, the center will have no purpose and no meaning going forward. And so that was my number one requirement. Believe it or not, Roscoe, over 200 people were either nominated or applied for the job. and they ranged from senior professors at major Ivy League and other universities to corporate leaders to people in communications and all the rest of that. And to be perfectly honest, the search committee was so frankly surprised and overwhelmed by the interest that some of these senior professors were exhibiting, that they, in the first round, seemed to be committed to getting one of these senior scholars.
And you ended up with Khalil.
And we ended up with Khalil because I kept insisting we had to have somebody young.
And he's got quite a task to follow Howard Dodson at the Schomburg Center. And we all wish Howard well, and we wish Khalil well. Thanks for being with us on African American Legends.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Thank you, buddy.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.